Hey everyone. So I'm sure you heard about this situation happening over the weekend, but I didn't even know too much about it. I mean, I read about something online on Twitter and Facebook and all that, and I had no idea what was going on. So I'm watching, a video done by Clownfish TV, Neon and Geeky Sparkles, and then I watch another one based on the same, focusing on the same subject by 3C Films, Chris, if you will, who also has 3C Films Clips, another YouTube channel is. And I was watching basically both videos, and something happened over the weekend with the release of the Minecraft movie that, well, first of all, it's one thing to, want to film your reaction to a moment happening because, hey, you want to preserve that moment and say, in the future that you were there when it happened initially. Like with Avengers Endgame, when, you have the Falcon, who's now Captain America, Anthony Mackie's voice come over the headset or intercom towards Steve Rogers, Captain America, and says, "Cap, on your right." And all of a sudden, the place just pops. It just blows. It just, the reaction is just, something that even people like John Campea has, repeatedly said is a moment they'll never forget, or at least acknowledged it's a moment they'll never forget. Because all theater reactions across the globe blew up, when they heard that. And they even got louder when the portals were opening and you saw all the characters of the MCU coming out to, take part in this final battle. And then later on, we have Spider-Man No Way Home, and you have the interactions between Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker, Andrew Garfield, and Peter Parker, Tom Holland, and the pops those got, again, you can find them online, is unreal. It is just unreal. And then one of the more recent examples, from what I could tell, is Sonic 4. I mean, not Sonic 4, but Sonic 3. I was just checking something again. I was just checking something there, guys. Trying to do so I have an opportunity. Because if those of you that follow me for so long, you know what spring break is about. And what happens. Or any other breaks throughout the year. But anyway, getting back on topic. And what I was trying to say is that recently it happened with Sonic 3. Especially the ending. The mid-credit scenes. And you see that. So it's one thing to be excited, to want to record your reaction in a moment happening. Because again, with that recent example, you have Amy Rose debuting finally, and all that, basically setting up the fourth film. So you're like, cool, this is all great, we're happy. You want to immortalize as best you can that moment. And it's nothing really new. I mean, this has been happening for years, for decades. I can recall when I went to go see The Lion King 31 years ago in Topeka, Kansas at the West Ridge Mall. I went there, I think it was like opening weekend, or at least one of the opening weekends, and the place was packed. Me and my dad were sitting down to watch it, and we get to the beginning, and you kind of get some clapping with the sun rising and all that, but in the moment they showed Pride Walk, the way they, animated that, first showing of Pride Walk, the whole place erupted. The whole place clapped. They clapped. They're like, yeah, and all that. They were excited because all of a sudden they're witnessing something that they know is going to be huge. It's going to be huge in the long run. And, that's one example of reacting but not having film to be, not having a way, I should say, to post it online to share it with the world. Because we didn't have that back then. And then, fast forward about, 8 years later to 2002. And again, we're just a few years away from YouTube and these kind of things probably being posted online. But, you fast forward 8 years later, and I'm sitting at the Southwind Mall, I think that's what it's called, in Lawrence, Kansas. It's, just down the street from where I live. So I'm, sitting there, and I'm getting ready to watch X-Men 2, X-Men United. And I saw it twice in that day. I saw it twice. And I think it was one of those shows, I think the first or second showing, when we saw that scene at the end, after Jean Grey had sacrificed herself, and then we see that ocean she sacrificed herself in, overhead. We get that overhead shot of that ocean or that river, and we suddenly hear her voice, and suddenly we see, what is in that ocean, in that river, based on what she's saying, everybody in that theater erupted. And there was a guy that I sat next to, I high-fived. I was like, yeah, here we go, because we knew what that meant for the third film. That meant the Phoenix. We were going to get the Phoenix, although we didn't get the Phoenix the way we were supposed to get her, initially, or we thought we were going to get her in the third film, but still, thankfully, Bryan Singer came back and corrected that, with Days of Future Past. But anyway, but to get to the point, we were all happy, we were all excited. And again, remind you, this was 3 years before YouTube. 3 years before YouTube. So to film to have that kind of reaction, it's nothing new. But here's the big difference, though. Here's the big difference. Our reactions were nothing compared to what the Minecraft movie did. Now, of course, there have been reports in the past where certain individuals, not entire crowds, but certain individuals, would do some weird stuff, some X-rated stuff, if you will, that would basically make the news and get them kicked out of the theater, if not banned for the theater, for good. And that's one thing. That's one thing. And that's one individual. That's one individual. That's it. But, or maybe even two, because there have been some reports that some people will go to a movie, go into the back, way back, if you will, where they can't be seen, like in the corner, and instead of watching a movie, they would get it on. But again, that's like one or two individuals. And of course, we've heard about some tragic situations, of course, as well. I mean, the most infamous is what happened with, with the Dark Knight and everything. In that movie, the second Christopher Nolan film. It had Christian Bale. The second one. We all know about that tragic situation. But again, what I'm getting at is there have been all kinds of situations. Some embarrassing, some tragic, like I said, and they've all made the news. And, look, nothing funny about, nothing hilarious or crazy or anything, or, embarrassing, if you will, or uncouth about, the tragic situation and, doing that screening of the Dark Knight film. Nothing fun about that. I mean, that is a tragedy that should thankfully never happen again. But point I'm getting at is we've had a lot of different moments. We've had a lot of different moments. And I know people will say, well, this pales in comparison to what happened in that Colorado theater. Yeah, it does pale in comparison because, it wasn't tragic, but you have to imagine that it was downright embarrassing for the parents who may be taking their kids or accompanied their kids to the film, or probably found out about this because the police got called. Because yes, police did get called. They got called to, to basically, restore order. You had theater management, and a lot of these videos, I'm not going to put any of these videos online, but a lot of these videos, because you can find them mostly online too. But a lot of these videos also show theater management coming in and say, "Hey, keep it down, or you guys are going to get your asses thrown out." And and it's like, you gotta imagine how embarrassing it is for the parents. They get this phone call, or they're looking on their Instagram or their YouTube or their social media, and they're seeing their theater on there, and they're seeing maybe their kid on there doing what they're doing. It's like, what is this? What did I send my kid to? It's one of those situations to where it's one thing to have a reaction to, a certain character coming on screen and everything, making their debut, like with Sonic, the mid-credit scene of Sonic 3, with Metal Sonic and then Amy, that's one thing. It's another, to be excited towards the ending of a film like Avengers Endgame, and you have that assembly of all the characters. That's another. It's one thing to be excited about the interaction between all three Spider-Men. Okay, that's a third. And also even pre-YouTube days, pre-social media days, it's one thing to high-five and be excited of, oh, the Phoenix is coming. Or it's another to be excited at the opening of a film because it's going to be big. It's going to be a classic, just the way it's presented. It's one thing to do all that. It's one thing to do all that, but all of those were always done in an orderly fashion. The people that would go and see these films, families or individually, would do it in an orderly fashion because they knew, one, it was the end of the film, which kind of helped, or the middle of the film, which kind of helped, but they also knew that after that initial reaction was done, they could just move on. They could just focus on the rest of the film to see what's going to happen next. But this was embarrassing. Even the UK got into it, but the UK theaters were more respectful. It's like when the attendant or the management came in and said, look, you don't do this, you're going to be kicked out. They were fine. Here in the US, you have videos going around where you have teenagers just joking about, saying, can I get a refund? Oh. It's like, this ain't a joke, folks. You have one person getting popcorn thrown in the back by a teenager. You have teenagers and kids going up on the stages of the theater doing speeches, or going in front of one of the audiences before a group of audiences before the movie happens, giving a speech. And it's like, what are you doing? You even have one parent or one person telling one of the kids doing that, get down. It's, again, it's one thing to be excited about a film happening and everything. It's one thing to be excited. It's another to take it too far, and they took it too far here. They took it too far, and you have parents coming in, being called to get their kids. You have kids escorted. It's like, I think one person was right. They need to, at least for the movie, grow up and keep the fandom to a very low minimum. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the whole situation. Were you part of this? Did you see this happen in person when you attended the film? Let me know. What did you feel about it? And until then,